Hi, my name is Robert. Today, our group will be covering ecological systems during this presentation. Ecological systems is a subcategory of a broader range of theory known as open system. But for today's purposes, we're just going to be covering ecological system. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. So, what is systems theory? System theory is so first, let's look at a theory. A theory is a logical system of a concept that helps explain observation and contributes to development of a body of knowledge. Open systems are ongoing interactions with your environment. So the key thing to open system is uh, an individual and its interaction to the environment. So individuals, families, communities, churches, and schools and societies. Uh, but our objective for today would be talking about more in focus in ecological systems theory. So ecological systems is an individual development that takes place in a complex set of interconnected systems. Some take place in complex sets of interconnected systems. So what necessarily we're talking about is human development and how these systems affect a child's development. And they're kind of brought in through these layers of systems.
The ecological theory was developed by Yuri Bronfenbrenner, one of the world's leading scholars in developmental psychology. Bronfenbrenner was born in Moscow, Russia in 1917 and arrived in America at the age of 6. After attending high school in New York, he attended Cornell University, where he completed a double major in psychology and music. After graduating with his bachelor's degree in 1938, Bronfenbrenner went on to earn a master's degree at Harvard and then graduated with his doctorate degree from the University of Michigan in 1942. On the day of his graduation, he was inducted into the Army, where he served for several years as a psychologist in the medical corps. In 1948, Bronfenbrenner joined the Cornell faculty, where he remained for the rest of his professional life. The ecology of human development, established by Bronfenbrenner in 1979, transformed the way many social and behavioral scientists approached the study of human beings and their environments. His theoretical position held that human development is a product of cultural, social, economic, political, and psychological forces. His published contributions earned him numerous awards and honors, including the prestigious James McKean Cattell Award for Lifetime Contribution, granted to him by the American Psychological Society. Yuri Bronfenbrenner passed away at his home in Ithaca, New York on September 25th, 2005, due to complications from diabetes, and he will always be remembered for his contributions to our understanding of human development.
Bronfenbrenner explains the role of the child consists of 5 systems of interaction: microsystem, mesosystem, the exosystem, the microsystem, and the chronosystem. Each system depends on the contextual nature of the person's life and offers an ever-growing diversity of options and source of growth. Microsystem is the first layer of Bronfenbrenner's ecological system. The microsystem is the system closest to the child and includes some immediate environment that the child has the most interactions with. This includes their family, neighbors, and as children get older, the microsystem grows as well in schools, throughout the formation of teacher-student relationships, and friends with the peers their age. Familiar relationships are very important for the development of the child, and the damaging of them can have significant negative impacts. According to the research study by Williams and Swick published in the Early Childhood Education Journal, damage to the familiar relationships with the microsystem as a result of substance abuse, domestic violence, and homelessness can cause severe damage to the child since such stressors prevent the child from forming important relationships from which they learn behavior. Indeed, the microsystem is critical in the development of the child since damage to it can result in perpetuations of violence and other negative behaviors learned from the dysfunctional family environment. Mesosystem is the second layer of Brunfer-Berner's ecological system. The mesosystem includes the connections between the various elements of the microsystem, such as the interactions with neighborhoods they live in, religious communities that they are affiliated with, and interactions between the child, parent, and their teacher. According to an article by Lynn and Bates published in the Early Childhood Education Journal, home visits are part of the mesosystem because it promotes two elements of the microsystem, home and school, to interact with each other. It is recommended teachers to conduct home visits to be able to understand the child's environment and be able to have the stronger relationships with the child and their family. They have found that home visits by teachers help parents to be more involved in their child's education. In the article by Young Fong Pat, it also suggests that for immigrants' children, teachers need to be more involved with the parent and understand the child's culture so that they can create the acceptance environment at school.
Ecosystems is the third layer of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems. It's a relationship that exists between two or more settings. This may not contain a developing child. What this means is basically it's affecting the child indirectly, and it's a link between um, two settings. For example, it's um, a parent who's having distress at work and gets yelled or demoted at work might take that anger out on the child. So this is affecting the child, and when parent is stressed out, child is stressed out. Macrosystems. So macrosystems are the fourth layer of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems. It's the largest system that contains all the distant people and places that significantly affect the child. It's made up of cultural patterns and values and dominant beliefs. So this is usually this falls kind of dominant beliefs falls under religion. You know, are you Catholic? Are you Buddhist? Are you Christian? Are you Muslim? So those um, those beliefs fall under the macro system. So when we also look further into macro system, that's also neighborhoods. So if you live in an urban neighborhood versus a rural neighborhood, Um, political values also take place in the macro systems. So Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, stuff like that. And I'll show you an example of macro systems. So, for example, a child living in an area that's a violent neighborhood or living in a war zone area may have a profound effect on child's development. So, let's say if a child lives in is developing is going through adolescence in Iraq and it's under a heavily war zoned area, this can have effect on the child's development. Um, so when we look at macrosystems, we're looking at larger cultural and social contexts. So I came across this journal. It's called "The Neighborhoods They Live in: The Effects of Neighborhood Residents on a Child and Adolescent's Outcomes." So this is a research journal that was written by Tema Leventhal and Janine Brooke Guns, and they were kind of doing the research and they wanted to see if there's any correlation with sexual activity and childbearing, academic performance, and emotional behavior and delinquent behavior, and its correlation with neighborhoods. So what they found was higher sexual activity and childbearing and in lower incoming neighborhoods. So they found that this was more higher, and they also found that there's a positive correlation with academic performance. So lower academic performance with lower economic status neighborhoods. There's positive correlation there, and they found more emotional behavior and delinquent behavior correlated with lower social economic status neighborhoods as well when they did this research. So kind of the final layer, and this is kind of seen like the third dimension of the layer in Bronfenbrenner's ecological system, is known as chronosystem, and this kind of deals with time. So It's time and stuff that, for example, transitions and shifts in one's lifespan may also involve social historical context and influences a person. An example like this can be a child that parents are going through a divorce, and this kind of time frame really affects a child's development. And this transition in time or shift in time is really changing the course of the child's life. So in effect, it's really changing the child's this change is affecting the child's development. So kind of stumbling upon my research, a good friend of mine sent me a great video uh, called Two American Families, and this is a documentary produced by PBS, and it's presented by Frontline. And this is a documentary that follows two American working class families. Frontline documents three major stages in these families' lives. They document the child's development and the parents' lives when it comes to living in America during um, the Bush era, the first Bush era to the Obama era. So they depict three stages of these families' lives, and it goes to show this documentary really supports Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems work because the documentary depicts how these children are affected by the parents and their socioeconomic status, how essentially how they develop, and the great thing about this documentary, it really documents that on paper. It's really interesting, um, and it shows like the effects of struggling to put food on the table, um, how it sets a tone for these children for their futures. And at the end of the documentary, it does. There is a correlation, and there is an effect in which you have parents who are struggling, trying to make ends meet, and how this kind of affects the child's life in the future. And they do depict that in the documentary. They kind of follow these families and how they develop over time. It's a great documentary. I highly suggest you watch it. It's called Two American Families. It's from Frontline, and it's by PBS, and it's free on YouTube. It's a great, and I highly suggest you watch it. It's really interesting.
Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory is being applied in schools to help children who have experienced trauma. According to the article, An Ecological Perspective on Emerging Trauma-Informed Teaching Practices, written by Chantel Crosby, trauma-informed educational practices in schools can provide critical support to students impacted by experiences of psychological trauma. Childhood trauma has been proven to negatively impact youth functioning, specifically by impeding their cognitive, social, and emotional development in childhood. Signs of trauma in students include impairment in academic achievement, difficulties controlling behavior, weak interpersonal skills, and a general lack of success in school. Fortunately, schools can play a major role in improving educational outcomes for traumatized students, and implementing trauma informed practices can assist in creating environments where these children can be successful. Bronfenbrenner's ecological perspective gives school social workers, teachers, and other support staff a framework for understanding a child's developmental deficits, and they can adapt their interventions and develop strategies for helping children based on the child's unique learning needs. The ecological theory requires school practitioners to consider their impact on their students' ecologies and the potential trauma-informed practices in improving these ecologies. Thus, traumatized children are embraced and cultivated into individuals who, with the support of their educators, can heal from their past and create better futures for themselves. Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological model is currently being utilized by clinical psychologists, therapists, and other service providers in their work with children and families. According to the article, Ecological Approach to Child and Family Clinical and Counseling Psychology, written by Elizabeth Stormshack and Thomas Dishian, The social ecological theory of development has been adapted and revised in clinical settings to be applied to different developmental problems and interventions. From an ecological model, psychologists propose that changes made in systems across the child's developmental context will elicit changes in individual behavior. The therapists use the ecological model to assess which areas their clients are well or maladapted and construct interventions based on their findings. The clinical application of the ecological theory requires that therapists work from a trans theoretical framework. Although these professionals working with children and families might incorporate other theories in their therapy, such as family systems theory, they all come together under an ecological framework as the tools for making changes within each level of the system.
So that concludes our presentation for ecological systems theory. I hope you enjoyed our presentation. And we're just going to follow up with a question here. Reflect on an ecological system model and think about which layer in the ecological system model that has significantly affected you during development and describe how it has shaped your behavior today. All right, everyone, so that concludes the presentation. Stay safe, everyone, and take care.